None. There it is. Welcome, everybody. Good evening. My name is Joanna Harris, and I am so excited to welcome you all to tonight's event, a conversation with Mariko Tamaki and Jillian Tamaki about their new book, Roaming. So excited. Just before we get started, I wanted to do some thank yous and just a little bit of housekeeping. So first of all, thank yous. I would love to thank the DC Public Library Foundation for supporting this event. You might have noticed that we have some complimentary books that we are giving away tonight, some complimentary free copies of Roaming. Those are courtesy of the DC Public Library Foundation. So thank you so much to them. And then, of course, would love to thank Loyalty Bookstores for partnering with us to bring the Tamakis here at the library tonight. Thank you guys so much. I see that some of you have already picked up your copies of Roaming, but just for those of you who aren't aware, outside Loyalty Bookstores is set up, and you can purchase a copy of the book, and there might still be some complimentary copies available. You'll check in with them. So just past those glass doors, that desk right outside there in the lobby. And then one last bit of housekeeping. If you have questions, there'll be time for questions at the end. So we just ask that you hold your questions until the end of the presentation. And without any further ado, I would love to introduce Christine Ballo from Loyalty Bookstores. Give it up for her.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I have been so excited for tonight's event. I was lucky enough to read an early copy of Roaming back in, I don't know when that was, February. So I have been super excited. As a queer Asian woman, I love the Tamakis and Roaming. So yeah, let me get to bios and all of that fun stuff. Obviously, I just want to thank the library and the Library Foundation and SPX for partnering with us for tonight's event. In case you don't know Loyalty, we are in the Petworth neighborhood of DC. We're in downtown Silver Spring, and we are a Black, queer, and Asian-owned bookstore. And we're big graphic novels fans, so yay! All right, bios. So our convo partner tonight is a friend of Loyalty's. Melissa Scholes-Young is the author of the novels The Hive and Flood, and editor of Grace and Darkness and Furious Gravity, 2 anthologies of new writing by DC women writers. Melissa is a contributing editor at Fiction Writers Review. Her work has appeared in The Atlantic, Washington Post, Poets and Writers, Plowshares, LitHub, and elsewhere. She's also been the recipient of the Breadloaf Fellowship, Center for Mark Twain Studies Fellowship. Born and raised in Hannibal, Missouri, she is currently an associate professor in literature at American University. And our authors of the hour, Jillian Tamaki is a cartoonist, illustrator, and educator raised in Calgary, Alberta. She is the author of the Eisner Award-winning graphic novels Super Mutant Magic Academy and Boundless, and the author-illustrator of 2 picture books, including most recently Our Little Kitchen. With her cousin, Mariko Tamaki, she is the co-creator of the young adult graphic novel Skim, This One Summer, which won a Governor General's Award and Caldecott Honor. She lives in Toronto, Ontario. And Mariko Tamaki is a Canadian writer living in California. She is the co-creator of the graphic novel Skim and This One Summer with Jillian. You might have heard of her. I just said her bio. And Laura Dean keeps breaking up with me with Rosemary Valero O'Connell. She writes superhero comics for DC Comics, Dark Horse, and Marvel. Mariko is the recipient of the Eisner for Best Writer in 2020. Collectively, her works have received Prince Honors, Eisner, Ignatz, Ringo, and Prism Awards. She is the curator of the Abrams LGBTQ imprint, Shirley Books. Y'all, we are in for a frickin' treat tonight. What an honor to celebrate Roaming. And Jillian and Mariko, please join me in an enthusiastic round of applause.
Oh, hello, hello, hello. I feel like we're supposed to be behind a curtain and then run towards the
are we-
stage at some point.
Oh, wait, am I
Or we should
moving?
take seats before, because getting in these seats in front of you is
Very intentional. Okay.
Nobody's
can-
going to judge me
Oh
getting
my
in
God.
this.
really, we can write books, but sitting in these seats?
I'm in, not getting
Oh
out.
my God. All right. We're here. Thank you for coming, everybody.
Yes. Yay. This is our first stop on our tour.
Yeah.
You guys are the first. Thank you for being the
You're
first.
getting, yeah. It's going to be fresh. It's
gonna
going to
be
be
raw.
raw,
Yeah.
unfiltered.
Yeah.
You know, your first run.
It's going to be like the grocery store sushi we just ate. Raw.
Hopefully not that bad.
Welcome to DC.
Thank you.
Welcome to the swamp.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a good place to start your tour.
Yes. I packed a sweater.
Not a good
I
idea.
even brought it tonight. I don't know why, but yes.
So I guess we're going to just hop on in, right?
Let's do
Okay.
it.
Let's go.
Click.
Oh, back.
Oh, no.
Well, the first question, where did it all begin? How do you know each? I feel like there's some perennial questions that we always get. I feel like we've been sisters a lot. We've been twins.
Twins.
Recently.
Yes.
But no, we are cousins.
Yes. We have, our dads are brothers.
Yeah, so here's a picture of us. And we did not grow up together. I grew up in Calgary in the West, and Marika grew up in Toronto. And we kind of meet up for every 5 years for funerals
Yeah.
or weddings. was the
Anytime
thing.
someone died, when our Aunt Kathy got married, our grandfather died.
Yeah.
We were hanging out.
So that's the first common fact. Roaming is our third collaboration.
Yes. It's our third book together, published by Drawn and Quarterly.
It's spring break. We're going to give a little run through of synopsis. It's spring break, 2009. Friends Zoe and Danny travel from their respective Canadian universities to meet up in New York City. Danny brings along her sassy classmate, Fiona, who has visited New York City before, thus making her the expert. They settle into their dingy hostel near Penn Station and set out to see the sights. Oh, it's a little cut off on the bottom. Oh, well.
There's more sites down here.
They see art, hit all the touristy spots, battle travel fatigue, eat a ton of pizza, and, of course, shop their asses off.
Eventually, sparks fly between Zoe and Fiona, Danny's friend. Because all trips that you take as a late teen with more than one other person always go so well, Zoe and Fiona end up getting together and hooking up, and this act of passion explodes completely. Any kind of like positive dynamics of the trip, everything basically like goes wrong from this point forward.
Either the best night of the trip or the worst night of the trip, depending on your perspective.
Basically, we wanted to tell a story about like what it means to sort of be on that other end of high school when you're sort of like experimenting with some version of being in adulthood and kind of moving away from the people that you have like known forever, and you're starting kind of your new forever.
So the story has its seeds in 2019. I just started kicking around the idea for a new story, and at that point, with any idea, I don't really know the final form of it. I've done picture books, I've done, if you follow me on Instagram, I do little farty comics that just I dash off and put up, in a day. So the story doesn't really know its shape yet. I just knew that I wanted to do something about travel and the texture of travel, and I had some experiences as a young person, and traveling with your friends for the first time and not with your parents, and thinking you know a lot about the world because you're 19 and you really don't know anything. And that was just such a unique, vivid experience that's what I wanted to capture. And the idea and the energy. These are just some like super, super rough sketches of scenes, like snapshots, moments that I knew I really wanted to capture in. And you can see I just have like Magnolia Bakery, Highline, M&M store, Brooklyn, all these places that I just feel like would be very rich and like fruitful. You know, not everything even made it into, they don't even make it out to Greenpoint. So I just knew I wanted to do something very energetic and fun. Like I feel like our past books they had a heaviness and a melancholy to them, which
Why do
is
you look at me
fine.
when
I'm a
you
very
say that?
melancholy person too, but something very energetic and like actually sexy. So I had also taught, I lived in New York from 2005 to 2015, and I taught I taught in art schools, and there were a lot of 19-year-olds and 20-year-olds that were experiencing the city for their first time at that age, at that time. So I was inspired by those kids that I knew as well. One last thing I'll sort of say about, and these are just very, very rough early sketches that you don't know where they go, you're just trying to understand the character. But I always keep a little document of production notes, like things I'm thinking about as I go along, or to be honest, some of it is like what to talk about when you're touring the book, because sometimes you forget like all these things you're thinking about because it's just an ocean of ideas. But I had seen a screening of Withnail and I at a review cinema in Toronto, and was just really taken with this idea of like a debaucherous, complicated dynamic that in this story that kind of meanders. So that was also like an inspiration.
Best movie. So
Good movie, very good movie.
Eats food sexily.
Yes. And you know, even though we had, we've never really write to a demographic, but our books had been slotted into like the YA demographic, and this time we knew that we wanted to try our hand at something slightly above that. I guess it's called new adult now.
You're all new adults.
Yeah.
Good luck to us. I mean, I do think that we wrote our first book about a teenager without thinking that it was YA, because we did not know about the existence of YA. So we found out that we were writing YA, and then we wrote another book that was about a slightly younger group of people that was also YA. And so this time we wanted to specifically avoid the kind of like world of teenagers and move to something that felt new to us.
Yeah. So this is just like some of the very first things that I had sent Mariko, some of these earlier sketches, and this is just a really sketched out loose scene that you can kind of barely see what's going on. But I knew the characters, I knew this dynamic, but that's about what I had before I was like, I think that the final form for this is actually a book I would make with Mariko. It feels spiritually connected to Skim in This One Summer. So at that point I was like, hey, do you want to work on this book about New York with me?
What if we did this book?
Yeah, exactly.
Do I talk about the stuff now? No. Yes?
Well, what is a Mariko Gillian book?
Oh, yes. This is a Mariko Gillian book.
Yeah, so like we had like this, it just felt like it fit in with this idea of these themes of friendships gone awry, transitional times, like that muddiness between eras in your life, you know? Like sometimes, especially with This One Summer, I feel like part of the controversy about it is like, this is not like for kids, but it's like, how do you get to be an adult? Like, how do you get to be a teenager? It's a very messy process. You just don't wake up one day and suddenly you're a teenager. It's like such a messy, the liminal space is very messy, and I feel like that's like a space we occupy.
Because all ages are aware of each other. Children are aware of adults and what it means to be an adult because they're surrounded by adults. Teenagers are aware of what it means to be a teenager because they know that they're not kids anymore, and they're sort of like, everybody's kind of in conversation with some other age as you're trying to figure out what age you are. I think that our stuff, especially This One Summer, is very much about that, like figuring out what it means to be an adult by sort of like trying to mimic what you think adults are doing. We always have one character who's kind of trying to be a little bit older than they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Roaming is the first book that we had worked on that I kind of instigated the story.
Yes. So in the past, like This One Summer is about like a chubby, weird girl who goes to the cottage, which is kind of me. So this was the first time that the story originated with Jillian. She wanted to do this book about New York, and she actually sent me like the beginnings of the story. She sent me the sketches you saw earlier, and like the beginnings of a script. So it was really a chance for us to write together, which, I think we've had this long history of having our work kind of like devalued as a collaboration and having a lot of our work kind of sectioned into like who wrote it and who drew it.
Yeah.
And we really wanted to do some version of something that there was sort of an irrefutableness to. This was created by
very
both of us.
enmeshed.
Yes, we are enmeshed. We are happily enmeshed.
TBT.
Yes, this is me. This is it. This is what I used to look like. This is my hair. Yes, I think I come by a sort of love of collaboration naturally. I grew up in a city of collaborators. I grew up in a city, Toronto, where really being an artist was like, doing cabaret shows, doing a lot of sort of theater without knowing how to do theater, and really having an opportunity. I think I grew up as an artist in cities where you had a lot of opportunity to experiment without having to like declare your like official status as like
Declare
a writer.
your major.
Yeah, you didn't have to declare your major. People were like, "What
Yeah.
did you do?" And you're like, "I just did a puppet show." Like it was like that.
Yeah. And what a gift, honestly, like to not get nailed down to any sort of form or discipline and
Yeah.
be able to explore. Yeah.
But also because I had done theater, the scripts that I sent Jillian when I first sent her scripts when we first started working together were essentially theater scripts because that's what I knew how to write. So they were sort of acts and scenes with dialogue and like basically like a set description or like a scene description of like they're in a school, it's noon, and they're going to class and they're arguing, and then just like the dialogue.
Which is quite different from a mainstream writing process,
Yeah.
right? Which mainstream comics, as I understand it, you work in that, but I'm just
I do.
going to throw it out there. A writer breaks it down by panel to panel.
Yeah, mainstream scripts because of the sort of the machinery of comics, and when it comes to like DC and Marvel, everything has to be approved by so many people before it gets to the artist. Everything is like broken down so that you can practically see the page before it goes to the artist.
Right. And so, I mean, this is the only way that I've ever known how to make comics or collaborate, because I didn't have any comics training either. I did graphic design school. But you can sort of see how it looks. It looks like a play with mostly dialogue and some stage direction, and these are my little notes as I'm reading it. Here's a little section from from Roaming, which was kind of different in that we just started emailing a document and passing it back and forth like a volleyball.
Yeah.
Here's that page translated into images.
It's also kind of nice because it's plausible deniability, right? Like it's like whoever feels called out in either of our lives, we can always be like, it's a combination, man. There's no individual person in any of this. It's all an amalgamation of like a bunch of experiences and people that we've known, and
Yeah.
and it all gets fleshed out so that it's purely ahistorical in the end because it is such a combination of our two brains.
Here's some archival photos of me. This is me at in design school. You can see somebody's architectural rendering in the background on like illustration board. That's how long ago this was. They didn't let us go into computers until like third year. And then this is me at my first job. I worked in video games, texturing little texture squares. This is the office cubicle that they gave me. Yes, this is also when I started making comics, so around 2004, and I started making mini comics, interestingly enough, about the city I was living in. I had moved to Edmonton, Alberta, and was the first time living alone as an adult, and I was very inspired by the weirdness of this place. So I've sort of been making comics about cities for a while, I guess. But I don't have any comics training, like I kind of mentioned. So I approach everything like a magazine layout. Here's some thumbnails, which really don't make any sense to anybody but me, because they're just blobs. But you have to bring it up to a point where you can edit, right? And so this is a program called Clip Studio. It's, now it has the text in there and the images, and this is what we will edit together.
Yes, our history of comic editing is a little bit distinct because we've worked with amazing publishers with amazing editors. I mean, we worked with Callista Brill, for example, on This One Summer. But I think, mostly edit ourselves. I think we go back and forth, and we're very like openly critical of things that we don't get or don't think should be in the book. So we go through that kind of process together. And I think because we're sort of, yeah, like also because comics editing has always been weird because you're always editing something that's not the final product.
Yeah, it's
So
true.
it's not like editing a page of text because you're editing the idea of what this will be once there's images. So I think we've kind of made up our own system that seems to work.
Yep. Here's just it's printed out, and oh yeah, this is like a picture of, because I made the decision for them to wear different clothes every day, which then like really was difficult keeping track, because I also don't do the final art in sequence because you're really rusty when you start. You don't know the world, so I jump around page to page over the book, the span of the book, so to keep track of like what ring she was wearing on what day. So this is my little guide for like day 3, what they're wearing that day, what side the little rip on her jeans was. She has a little beret in her hair. What side was that on? So I really don't know why I do this to myself.
Also, you can see that Jillian uses binders. Do you remember binders? Jillian still uses them.
Why 2009, though? Well, that was the New York I knew best, like I sort of said earlier. And trying to get that, try to show the city through the eyes of a tourist, but also being aware that New Yorkers will spot anything wrong, like any detail wrong immediately. Like, the F train doesn't run like that direction at that hour on that day. So, like, I was hyper vigilant that I had to get these details right. The big plan was to go, like this was the reference for this one summer, to go on a trip and really feel what it was like to be in that area. I didn't grow up in Cottage in Ontario, so I had to go and sort of experience this place like, viscerally, because I think a lot of our work is about sensory experience and trying to really be there and have a realism. So my plan was to go to New York and take reference and be there and really try to glean it from this firsthand experience I had gotten, like in this one summer. Here's another detail. These details that you really can't make up. You can try, but like there's stuff that you will never imagine because the real world is more bizarre and interesting than your imagination.
Why have all these garbage bags broken open?
Well,
What's up with that?
That's the mystery of the world. And then COVID happened and I couldn't go, but that was one big complication. The second was that the city has changed a lot. This is from Google. This is like Elizabeth Street 2022, and this is the same street in 2010. So even though you could have gone to New York, it would be in the past anyway. So I became this like Dropbox monster of like reference of, you can't probably see behind me, but it's like all the days, all the locations that they went to, all categorized. And just like digging into the internet, I kind of leaned into this idea that it's this book about tourists and the good and bad about being a tourist, and then you had to rely on the documentation of tourists and they have gone over every single corner of the city.
No likes.
For good and bad.
You didn't even like the video. Look,
No,
no likes.
I owe this person my life, but I can't throw him that like. Can't hit that like button. So this is a person that took like a 10-minute video of the M&M store in Times Square in 2010 or something, and I thanked them. I was able to go down to New York City when the borders opened up again in 2021 or whatever. And it really was like seeing a celebrity in real life. I was like, oh my God, there's like the candy tubes. Like, I've studied these.
I know these
things.
tubes.
I've seen these tubes in
know
my
these
dreams before. But you know what? Again, this is like a picture from Flickr, and you're just probably like, this person's partner was like, why are you taking photos of the seats at Newark Airport, and uploading it to the internet? And like, just the cartoonists of the future, thank you, because I really do aim for a level of like realism, and it's like I get a sick pleasure from like recreating the world in miniature. So
Well-
I need this stuff.
Also, the funny thing about this is also a conversation that was inspired by this woman having a very similar conversation, which is at the beginning of the book. It's not the exact conversation, but like we appreciate your Flickr photos and your personal conversations you have in public.
Yeah, you're being
All of those
cannibalized
things
by the artists of the
are
world.
super helpful.
And I had to throw this picture in because it was very hard won, because as much as I scoured the internet and YouTube videos, I could not find a picture of this escalator in Newark Airport, which plays this role where she's waiting for her friends to come down the escalator, and it needed to be from this angle. So when I finally went to New York, this was like my number one thing, was to take a picture of this escalator. So I paid like $30 to go to the airport and to take this picture. But it was really interesting, right? To use this material. It was always going to be a highly referenced book, but you don't want things to be photographs. Like, why anything be a drawing? Why, you might as well print a photograph if you're going to replicate a photograph. You want things to, it just feels dead. If you're like tracing a photograph or too highly replicating a photograph, it is not alive. So to try to, the goal was to have something very real, but through this filter of imagination and my memory and the emotion of the scene and what the characters are feeling. And that's always our goal, and I think is a good driving force for, I'm sure some of you are art students, so that is like, when you're confronted with the whole world, you could do anything. I think that honing in on the emotionality of what you're trying to convey and what the characters are feeling is always a good, like, little, lighthouse to follow.
Yeah, you're reflecting what it evokes in you.
And then, you know what? Like, a lot of the travel and some of those experiences are from traveling ourselves. And comics has been so amazing to us, and we have traveled a lot of the world that I have never been able to do, and it's been afforded me through comics. So I just wanted to.
Yay, comics.
Yeah. The end.
The end. That's us looking at New York in a heat wave. Thank you.
There you go.
Yay.
Now I want to just go read the book again.
Yes.
Like, it's inspiring, and to see the behind the scenes and the vulnerability also. Thank you for sharing that with us. As a novelist, I never get to do that. It's all in my head.
Yeah.
Right?
It's a really common question of, like, how do you guys work together? I think every single interview we get asked that. So it's nice. You can say it, but with the pictures, it's so much more vivid to be like, well, it's like scribbles.
Yeah.
But the scribbles are part of the steps to get to finished book, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right. Which I think as authors we rarely share. We just bring out our books, and here they are, and they're gorgeous, and they just popped out of us, rather than actually these are the years of mistakes,
Yes.
and here's all the novels that are in my drawer that I will never show anybody because they were a disaster, instead of, hey, look, here's my fancy bio.
Well, we share our mistakes, right? And I think that that's, I think that there's forms of writing like, people who write for television, and like people who write for theater, and anybody who works in any kind of improv, right? Where it's like there's a version of writing that is just like blurting out all your horrible ideas and then having someone be like, no, oh yeah, that's all right, like let's do that. So I do think that there's a vulnerability to it, but I also think that the thing that you get is that it's possible that one of your horrible ideas, someone's like, I don't think that's horrible, I think that's really interesting, and you end up with something that, left to your own devices with just your head.
Yeah, you would have
And just
canceled.
you would have been
Yeah.
like, we're not doing that. Nobody gets that. Like, it's actually fascinating when Julian and I talk, and there's an idea that she's like, I don't like that. And I'm like, oh, okay. What about this? And she's like, I like that. And I'm like, damn, okay, cool. Let's do that. Like,
That's
it's
the alchemy.
That's the alchemy of it, yeah.
Of collaboration. Yeah.
Absolutely. The point is to do something, and then we both work separately. We both work on our own projects. I write prose, and so I know what it is to just have it be mine. And I think that makes the projects that are ours individually feel very different. Like, I'm glad we have them, and I'm really glad we have this as well.
Yeah, that collaborative process is so fascinating, and you can see that the final project is so much richer for it.
Yeah, it's fair. As you sort of alluded to, it's very lonely. Like, I like making books on my own, but there is something really, I personally find burdensome to be responsible entirely for it to be funny, meaningful, serious in the right moments,
Right.
beautiful, like, do you know what I mean? Like, it's all on your shoulders to be all that thing. That's really, really hard. I feel like sharing that with somebody else and those responsibilities with somebody else to be like a nice break from like shouldering that all alone.
Yeah, I was at a book talk recently with Emily St. John Mandel. She wrote Station 11,
Yeah.
HBO series just came
And
out.
of course, I have to say, a Canadian. That's my
Yes.
job to jump in and
Very
point
fair.
that out.
Very fair. Very fair. And the audience, one of the questions was about changing the end of the HBO special,
Yeah.
which readers always have very strong feelings about. And I argue in my classroom, these are different forms, right?
Oh, yeah.
The book is a different form
Yes.
than the interpretation of art on a screen. And they questioned her, and I think they were waiting, which is why you all should get your questions ready. They were waiting for her to say, my book was better.
Yeah.
And instead she said, well, of course the screen version was better. It was 10 people around a table
Yeah.
collaborating on my ending, where it's just me in my tiny studio in Toronto or New York City making this up in my head.
Yeah.
And she really recognized that the collaborative process, yes, it made it better.
Well, and then the other side of that, as someone who's like been in one of those rooms, is that getting an idea past 8 people is exhausting because there's like 7 people are yes, and the 8th person is like, I don't know, and you're like, come on, Jennifer, we're all here, get here with us. And I think the benefit of Jillian and I is that also because we have this sort of work ahead before us, like because we've done work together before, we already have this kind of language that we're building on and challenging ourselves every time. So I think it's even like every book we do kind of like lessens the pressure of the books we're doing now because we have this kind of sense of what we've done, what we want to do
But we're
differently.
also lucky because we come from like a tradition of indie comics
Oh, yes.
and sort of art comics, even though we're in the big publishing world, you know, it's like we're publishing with Drawn and Quarterly, that the tradition is from those auteurs like Crumb and Dan Clowes and Chris Ware and
Doucet.
Julie Doucet, all these people that you're not going to be editing them like
Right.
Seth, you know, like you're not going to come in and tell them what to do. So I think that is the tradition we're coming from. We actually want feedback in editing. I think we're part of that wave of newer creators that wants some editorial feedback and borrowing that from like big, you know, publishing book world, I call it. So I think we sit in the middle, but we benefit from also being left alone a little bit.
Yeah, that's exactly it. We are like perfectly in the middle of those
It
two
feels
things.
great. Yeah.
Well, and there's so many layers to the story you're telling. And I'm thinking, we're in a public library, I'm thinking so much about how graphic novels are accessible and especially to reluctant readers. Like you have all of this visual literacy, these skills that are being built that are very different than when prose is just flat on the page.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember when we first started with Skim in 2008 and we went to our first ALA, we would do, you know, they do these things where you have like lunch with like librarians and stuff. And this was around the time where graphic novels were being really embraced by book world, but it was still kind of new, especially in the YA space. And we met a lot of librarians that were saying, I don't know anything about comics. Some of them even said, I don't know how to read them, which feels kind of impossible.
Or I can't read them.
Yeah, but they knew that it was that, especially young people really, really gravitated to them, and so they were behind it just for that because they saw how popular they were becoming. So
I mean, we also have to say, like, the sort of prejudice against comics has to do with the sort of origins of comics and the history of comics. Like, in terms of them being literary, like, nobody has any problem with the idea of, like, a visual medium, like film, being, like, you know, a serious thing that you're, like, you know, like...
or it can be serious.
That it can
Yeah.
be serious. But, you know, comics is, as a medium, it's not a genre. But the sort of notion of it for a very long time was, like, oh, it's, like, you know, superhero comics, which is somehow not serious, as opposed to like a novel, which is somehow, you know, categorized as serious. And I think that has just changed, like across the board, even in like various genres. It's just changed so much in terms of our notion of like what is like what has gravitas and what doesn't.
Yeah, and I'm even wondering if the pandemic has accelerated some of that learning. Meaning, I remember that I taught middle school, high school for years before I went to the university level, and parents were so reluctant when their kids were reading graphic.
Yeah.
And people in the literary world were reluctant about audio books.
Right.
Yeah.
Which I
It's not
love.
hashtag
Right.
not
I
real
know.
reading.
And
Yeah.
during the pandemic, audio was the biggest seller
Yeah.
in 2020
Yeah.
because we were all out walking around trying to avoid our families. And yet, who could concentrate on a page? And audio was so incredibly satisfying.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
what we found is it hasn't gone away, right? It's just opened, it's brought in more people into the conversation
Yeah.
to recognize that is reading also. Yeah.
I think that also comics has really benefited from like the success of certain books. Like I think Raina Tegelmaier's Smile, which basically like exploded across like the middle grade scene and like every child read. And I think also people like Nate Powell who have written, you know, or co-written like very serious comics about like history as opposed to just like, you know, like I think that there have been certain people who have really sort of pushed the genre. Like even when I first started like reading Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi, right? Like that was one of the first books, and like Alison Bechdel's Fun Home, right? Where you had these certain books that stuck out and kind of made their way into literary circles as being like, oh, this is a serious book, and kind of like paved the way for other people to do that too.
And you read them differently. What I've noticed is, well, I mean, the minute I got done reading Roaming, I wanted to start reading it again. I want to again as well, because I was reading it so, maybe I was reading prose, then I was reading the graphics, then I was reading, but to read them together just required a different skill, like a more elevated skill. Yeah, it was harder.
A cool thing we've noticed was with this month's summer is that it also lends itself to, I don't know, something about comics also, I guess it's all books, but especially with that one, that depending on your age, you get something different from the book too. Like if it depends on what age you're closest to, because there's sort of there's kids, there's teenagers, and there's adults, and if you're an adult, you get all three levels, and then if you're a little kid, if you're closer to the young kid's age, you get it on a different, I think I like to think it's still rich, but the adults are the ones getting the full.
Right. Well, because comics give you a
Scope.
different perspective on
Yeah.
a very personal story, right? Like
Right.
even our first comic, Skim, which is this very introverted, personalized diary narrative, but you're seeing this thing unfold outside of this character's immediate perspective. And I think that that's what comics do, is it kind of like automatically just kind of widens your gaze to the whole world as opposed to just one character's take on it.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up this one summer, because I've read that it's one of the most banned books. Congratulations on that. Well done. It means you've
Very
written
weird.
something meaningful, I
guess
think.
it's kind of cool as Canadians to me.
It's very surprising. I always think, I don't really consider my work dark. It's natural. I'm not sort of suppressing anything in the books that I make. These are sort of the books I want to make. And I'm like, I'm pretty mainstream naturally, and sort of pop. I love pop culture, and I think I fit into pop culture. And then I'm like, that's not really controversial. And then I remember that it's a banned book because it just goes to show you don't really actually have to be that cutting edge to
Yeah.
be banned these days.
No book is banned because of the content of the book specifically. If so, there are so many other books that you could
Right.
ban. I could give you a great list of books that are way more bannable than the books that are on the top 10 list. Books are banned because of the ideas that those books represent, not because of anything that's inside. And I think our book is like the perfect example. Like it's banned for LGBTQ content. There's one mention, and there's like one mention of the idea of sex, which these kids are wrong about because they're young. There's nothing graphic in that book because it won an award and it was considered an important book, and it was a book by queer BIPOC creators. I'm queer, she is not, just to be clear. That made it a bannable book. It's nothing to do with the people who ban these books don't read them. So that has nothing
And they
to do
also
with it.
don't understand what kids already know. Meaning, I find it disrespectful to young people to assume that they are so naive.
Yeah, the idea that some kid is going to the library to get like sexual content is hilarious. So, no, yes.
Well, it seems a success, not just because of the banning, but it definitely, I think, opens up a larger conversation about it.
Yeah.
But I want to talk about friendship, because that's what I loved so much about Roaming.
It's our subject.
That's your subject.
we keep coming back to it.
I
Yes.
know. Well, it's because what is happening between, can I just call them D and Z? I just love referring to them as D and Z because that's what they call each other in such a cute, affectionate way. What's so interesting to me about their friendship is this larger conversation about how friendships have to grow and evolve, right? They were friends in high school. That's their foundation. They're reuniting in New York City. And one of my favorite scenes is when they discover that one of their friends is going to get married, and they gossip and they tease and they reconnect on where they used to be. But they very much have met in New York City to figure out where their friendship is going to go, right? And I think travel is so incredibly ripe for friendship in that way. It tests all these boundaries. And then Fiona is this disruptor in it, right? She's the one left out of it. And so this moment of reconnection about their past, I think, really sets them up for how the friendship will be tested in New York City. I'm just curious if that's an accurate read of it. This friendship to me was so incredibly endearing.
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of delicious to like, I don't know. I find it so painful that like change,
Yeah.
and that relationships changing and you changing, forcing change are all around you with all the people that you know, and that's just the name of the game when you're 19 and you've gone to college. And so, yeah, that travel seemed like a perfect scenario for that. Like, when you travel, you really are like a little cell where you rely on each other. Even if you kind of are at odds with somebody that day, you kind of need each other still because you're the only people you know in this city. And I do think travel is that thing that brings out the best in people, the worst in people, all in the same day. So it seemed like a great stage for watching that friendship where it is now. We've also talked about some friendships are situational, right? Like once you need each other in high school, in that high school that you're both in, and then once the context changes, your relationship changes because you don't need each other in the same way.
It's like how the person you're most likely to become friends with in college is your roommate or a person who lives on your floor, right? Because you live on your floor, like it's proximity. And I do think the thing that we're constantly exploring is the thing about friendships changing is that they don't change for both people at the same time. Like Danny is very much Danny is going to New York to see the Zoe that she knew and hang out. She made the mistake of bringing Fiona. That's on her. Zoe slept with her. That's on Zoe. But I think that Zoe came to New York with this new haircut, with this kind of new person that she's being. Zoe has gone to university and discovered she's not the same person that she thought she was going to be. And I think that that's I say a fundamental part of my childhood was clearly when I watched Disney's The Fox and the Hound as a kid. And then that scarred me for life. And then everything I do is because I was always the person, I was always the last person to figure out, I was showing up with Cabbage Patch Kids, we're still doing this, right? And people were like, no, we're doing magazines now. And I was like, no Cabbage Patch Kids. Okay, no Cabbage Patch Kids. I never had the memo on what stage of maturity we were at. And I was always the last to one trick or treat. I was the deep late bloomer of all my friends. Also being gay, I think, was part of that. And I think I'm sort of endlessly fascinated by those kind of we talk about misconnections and miscommunications. And I think a lot of that has to do with you're not in the same place. Even though they're in the same city, and it's so much about that. They're not in the same place.
I think a lot of my work, even my solo work, is about trying to put a pin in feelings and emotions that are very contradictory at the same time, or they just flit in for a moment and then they're gone and you're trying to understand them. I feel like the Germans must have a word for mourning something before it's done. You know, your body knows that something's at the end, but you're in denial about it, and you're kind of grieving the thing before it's even gone, So I feel like I'm always trying to make sense of very squishy, ephemeral emotions. that are sad usually.
I love sad.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's true. We both write about sadness on our own too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Will you talk? You said Fiona was a mistake, or that bringing her there, perhaps.
I
And
mean-
I'm fascinated.
I think that there's multiple versions of Fiona, and I think it's a very big tell how people respond to Fiona. I think we grew to have more affection for Fiona the more we wrote and worked on this book. I mean, I think that there's, like Fiona's just doing her best to be the cool person that she thinks she needs to be to survive in this world. And she's not a very nice person as a result of that. But I think the older you get, the more you realize that the people who are like, it's like the person who comes for you immediately at a dinner party. You're like, what's your deal? Like, why am I the person who you need to grill about politics right now? And you're like, oh, because you need to be grilling somebody. I have the face of a person who should be grilled, and so that's what's happening now.
But it goes to show too, like even between us, I think we view things a little differently. Like I think Fiona also represents when you go to a new like college or a new environment. It doesn't have to be college necessarily. Like at that age, you do meet people that blow your mind a little bit and explode your worldview and your paradigm. That doesn't necessarily need to. That doesn't need to come from a good person sometimes,
No.
right? And I think that there's something just so profoundly interesting, and like the first year of college for me, I felt like I was on the freaking moon. Like I was like, I don't understand how the world works. Like I thought I knew, and I don't know. Like, and it was meeting a few people like that I had just never met a person like that before. I had never, and they kind of. Really it was mind-blowing. So I think that is what she represents to me.
Oh,
too.
sure.
Yeah.
No, and I think that's absolutely true. I mean, I think, too, is that who Fiona means to you, if you're in the moment on a trip to New York with Fiona, is one thing.
Yeah.
And who she means to you as an adult, like,
In
the people
retrospect.
the people that I remember most from university were not my friends. Were not, like, the amazing people who, like, were, like, just nice to me and, like, took notes from me in geology or whatever. It was the people who, like, stormed the party and like made the party their party and then stormed out, like took all the red wine and left. You're like, who is that girl?
Well, and Fiona, you wrote her with such compassion, even though she does some pretty gross things. She's also a character I felt enormous empathy for, and I think that's credit to your writing.
I think that what we wanted to do was to create. I mean, I kind of think about it as like revolving allegiances that the reader has with all the, like you kind of think somebody's in the right and then they kind of do something horrible. Like all of them do something horrible and they all have a moment to shine. And you kind of think somebody's this way and then they kind of refute it. And that was, I love that. That's so fun.
It's
And,
authentic.
and that's really, I do feel like what travel is like with a group of people, where you get to see the good, bad, and the ugly. Yeah.
Today you're like, Joe is the best. Let's travel with Joe all the time. The next day you're like, Joe is a nightmare. Let's leave Joe behind. And I think that that's also a credit to our writing process of kind of just like endlessly revising. And I think we found new things. And I think, the more especially for two of us working on this, I think we found all these nuances. Like, this could just very easily be a story of like the wicked third wheel who shows up and like takes over, and it's not. It's a story of these three very complicated young people who are trying to like go to New York and have a good time, and then multiple other things happen on that trip.
And they make mistakes.
They make big mistakes.
I love that. Yeah. We I could ask you all questions all night long. It's my own personal book club up here. But I would love to hear questions that you all have as well. And we have an extra mic, and we'd love to open it
Any
up
questions?
just to a conversation, please.
Ooh,
Yeah,
Yeah.
people have questions. I'm gonna do like this and then there.
Hi there. First off, thank you both for being here. This was great.
Thank you.
I was curious, what's the difference between working together versus an editor? Like, are there times that maybe you both agree, the editor doesn't, or maybe one of you agrees and they don't? Like, how does that relationship work?
I think we banter back and forth with what works for us. I think the difference is, for us working together and the changes we make, we are writing as well as editing. And really, editing is more a process of like pointing at things that are not working, less like writing actual scenes and sort of having equal input. So, like, one of the things that we did this time was we got beta readers, in part because, as Jillian has noted many times, we're not teenagers. And so it was good to get somebody who was an actual teenager to, like, say,
And a teenager not in the 90s.
yes, a teenager
You know what I
now,
mean?
now
Now-ish,
teenager.
yeah, yeah.
So, and that is, it's like, you know, that's input versus like between the two of us, which is like us sort of infusing the thing with actual scenes versus someone just saying like, I don't know if this scene is working, or I don't know if this is accurate to whatever. So that's
We've
sort
had
of,
pretty good luck with editing.
and we've had amazing work, yeah.
Where it wasn't too shattering. Yeah. Like, I think you need to rework the third act.
Yeah.
That hasn't happened yet.
Let's
But
get rid of this
it could
guy.
happen in the future.
You
Who
never
knows?
know, honestly. It's a crapshoot.
Hi. Earlier you mentioned that when you were working on Skim, you didn't know what a YA novel was, and you were told later that's what it was. And now YA and mid-grade graphic novels have blown up in mainstream book publishing. Have you felt pressure from publishers to make your books more YA? Because you mentioned that with Roaming, you were purposely trying to kind of push against the upper ceiling of that.
No, I feel like we're a little. I'm a little contradictory, like contrarian, I should say. Like, after this one summer, I went and did like a story called Sex Coven about like a sex cult, like in like Joshua Tree and a weird like haunted MP3. Like I like to zig purposefully to not get pigeonholed. So I feel like if you burst people's bubbles enough, they don't come to expect anything from you. And then doing children's books too. I mean, yeah, I guess I have not stayed in my lane, but I think that that's good. I don't know. I guess I would be kind of bored to do only one thing, and I'm an adult person. I don't feel like I have a lot of interests, so I've been very, very lucky to be able to explore those. But I don't know that we certainly could have dug into YA and done more YA, but we also don't make conventional YA graphic novels. No. So
I think
yeah.
that that's also the distinction is we don't make conventional,
Yeah, yeah.
which is to say conventional, we don't necessarily make YA that's just about young people. Most of the YA that we have written is also about adults. So I think like this one summer is a YA book that's half about the parents in the story. And that's like going
Like in
against the
some ways, this
convention.
one summer is not mature themes, but it feels the more mature.
very grown-up
to
book.
me a little bit because it's talking about marriage.
Yeah.
And it talks about like marriage breakdown, you know, which is like, to be honest, a more mature thing, like topic
Yes.
than anything that's in Roaming.
Yeah, publishing conventions are always kind of weird. I think that there is a little bit of pressure in terms of like what you think will be legible to publishers. But the truth of the matter is like I also work on this imprint for Abrams now, Shirley Books, and you are buying the book, you're not buying the genre, right? Like I think that even like if you have a publisher that is publishing the kinds of books that you love, then the pressure is going to be to have like, you know, it's about you making the best book you can make and about them really getting your book. And I also think, you know, the situation is now that, you know, there is kind of like this, like when something explodes and it sort of seems like that's the only thing, and then eventually the tide shift in publishing. It's like, especially with comics, it takes so long for a comic to come out. Like you're like only YA books, but there's so many adult books that I know that are like in the pipeline. They just haven't been announced yet.
There was, yeah.
Later tonight, I'm going to get started reading Roaming.
Yes.
Great discussion. I have two questions. The first one is just thinking about some of your memorable moments in writing the book, and you did a wonderful job walking us through that. But do you have one that really sticks out to you the most? So that's the first one. And then the second one is, at what point do you decide that the book is ready? Like, this is ready. We're not editing this book anymore. We're going to move forward with our finished product.
Yes, great questions. So much of art, whether it's single image, full comic, like everything in between, you know, is instinctual gut. You know, like I teach a lot as well, and I feel like half of like teaching is telling people, like guiding people to have good instincts, and knowing when to stop is a huge part of that, because you can go on forever and ever and ever and ever and ever.
And make it worse.
Yeah, and there's that, cliche of perfect is the enemy of done or whatever. And so it's hard to say, it just feels good enough. It doesn't even feel like perfect. It just feels good enough, and maybe you're too tired to keep on going. I mean, I think I'm a very instinctual creator, whether it's, again, single image or full book. To your first question, yes, I could definitely think of a moment, and it is when, there was one slide of it, where Danny and Zoe flip to the past, but it's not a flashback, it's them just physically embodying their forms of a year ago, And that was not in the script. We did not write that. Yeah. Okay, and now Zoe has long hair, and they're dressed like a little bit different, and they're at a house party. That was not in the script. In fact, they were just kind of getting high in their hostel room, on the carpet.
Spoiler.
Yes, but then I was this is kind of actually boring. Again, it's not really even intellectual, it's instinctual, this is kind of boring. I gotta make this more interesting. It really can be that base. It doesn't have to be the math isn't mathing on this. It just is it just doesn't feel interesting. I've got to sass this up a little bit. And having the idea of you could just show them as in their former forms when they were really good friends and they really did need each other. And that felt God, I'm good. And you do need some of those sometimes, because most of the time you're I'm horrible, I'm bad.
Yeah, what am I doing
I'm
here?
awful. Why am I doing this? And so sometimes you do need a little win like that. That was definitely that.
That is my favorite part of the book.
Yeah.
I do think for us, the writing of it, I think because the first 2 acts of the book are kind of their trip to New York, and then we kind of got to the 3rd act after this kind of crucial night, and then everything kind of changes.
Yeah.
And I think because there was this kind of free-for-all where it was the first time in our writing process where it wasn't just where are they going to go in New York? Now they go to the museum. Now they go to this. It was the first time that we were kind of figuring out together, okay, someone screws you over.
Yeah.
What do you do?
I know.
And that was so fun to write together. Just really, and it was I think there's always writing is all this kind of combination of plot and personality. And so it was such a fun combination of
what would she
what
do?
would she do?
Yeah,
and also and what would be, it's not even just the what she does is very small, because everything that we write is very small, but it was very all of that kind of emotion infused in that moment, and it was just so fun. The conversation she has by the fountain was so fun to write, and we just found all this kind of it was and it was a surprise, because I think there was one part of the book that was just go to New York, where are the places they go? And then there was another part of the book that's and now what happens?
Yeah.
That I think I was kind of even shocked by how well it works.
Yeah.
The whole
To
3rd act is
explode
my
the
favorite.
cell, I feel that was you. I remember because I remember you're just what if she just leaves? Then what happens? And that was really fun to work through a character together.
Yeah.
And because then you're sort of trying to listen to the character and divine what the character would do.
Yeah, and that is the fun part. There's, it's this grab bag of just say 8 weird things that could happen, and then just pick your favorites and go with that. So I love that part of it. Good question. Thank you.
We have time for one more.
Yeah.
Oh,
Cool shirt.
yeah.
So, it's been almost a decade since this one summer came out, and I was wondering if there's anything new you guys learned from the collaborative process of roaming.
Oh, what we learned from this one summer that we...
That's
In the
different.
intervening time.
Oh, yeah. I don't know.
I mean, I definitely feel after this one summer, we were talking a little bit about how isolating making graphic novels is, right? It's 3 years of your life, and you're sitting in your little cave making a thing, and then you come out to, and you're like, here it is, like, hope you like it, like it's my whole, like 3 years of my life here. And that's very exciting as it does feel monumental. However, it is very terrifying and, I don't know, even it's, you put so much effort into it, but people's attention it's competing with the whole world, right? So I wanted to do something different after that. I kind of talked about being a contrarian too, and then I did a webcomic called Super Mutant Magic Academy that was like really trying to envision a different rhythm of working. And I had worked with Mariko for a couple books, and I wanted to become a better writer myself. So I was like, I feel like you get to be a better writer or a better anything through repetition, doing it over and over and over again. And so a webcomic felt a great opportunity for that, where you don't know where the story's gonna go, you don't know the characters even, you're just starting and you're just learning how to storytell and learning how to write dialogue. So I'd done that, and then I had made these other short form comics after that, which ended up being in Boundless. So I feel like I really tried to hone my skills as a writer because I feel extremely comfortable drawing. Drawing is my strength and my passion and always has been. But writing is so hard. And so that was what I really wanted to focus on. And so I tried to choose projects that were short form, not huge graphic novels, a little bit lower stakes, that you could like really build up those muscles and really find your voice. And being asked to do it in a book over and over again is like asking a lot. That's why I feel like short form comics are always going to have a place, because I think that they're more accessible in terms of production than a full graphic novel.
Yeah, I feel like we both went away from this one summer and wrote a lot.
Yeah.
Like I started writing for DC Comics, and I think it was just like I had to go away and learn, like, I feel because Jillian is such a proficient and incredibly talented illustrator, I feel like I had kind of just like completely ceded any thoughts about that to you, and it was like an interesting thing to go and work in a medium where you have to, like, DC Comics scripts are very like, everything is plotted out, everything is like laid out on the page, and I had to sort of like force myself to kind of learn some of those skills. But I feel like the other thing was that working in that medium, I think working and doing all these other writing things, the work Jillian and I do together is such a specific process that I enjoy. And it was almost like, oh, I really love doing this, and I missed this thing. It was almost like we kind of like went away and like just like wrote our butts off, and then we're like, oh, and then this is really fun. And it's like, I think we can appreciate more the unique opportunity it is to work together, because we've kind of gone off and like also like writing that we both love, but like done so much other stuff.
Yeah, it sounds like over those 10 years, you all changed.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, and also it's been 10
Great.
years, but like it takes 4 years to make
Yeah.
a thing. So it wasn't 10 years when we started the book
Yeah.
too. So yeah.
I also think too, it's like we never wanted to be just like a duo, and I think that we've done very well to make sure that we're both our own individuals who like working together as opposed to have to.
Are you ready to sign some books?
Yeah, we're
To
going to
hang
sign
out
some
with
books
us?
for everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you. Thank you, Melissa.
Give us a moment and we'll set up out here. Melissa, thanks for leading the conversation, and thanks for everybody for coming.